Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Glenn, and today I'm here to talk to you about using your on-prem data with cloud tools, PowerApps, Power BI, and Microsoft Flow. If you have any questions after today, you can hit me up on the socials there. I'd love to chat with you and get you hooked up with more information. Today's agenda is, again, using your data in the cloud. So we'll talk about how we enable that by using the data gateway. What is the data gateway and why use it? And then we're just going to dive in and do some demo on connecting to your data using Flow. We're going to move some data around in SharePoint, and then we're going to report on data using Power BI. So I hope that's what you're here for. It's going to be awesome. Let's level set a little bit just to make sure we understand what we're talking about here. Data is the core of any business, and whether that's orders or that's customer data, that's employee data, we all work with data in some form. So it's very important for us to be able to work with that data no matter where it is. And we're able to do that with the business application platform. We're able to measure and act and automate data. And Microsoft enables that with measuring data with Power BI, act on the data with PowerApps, with forms, and enabling your users to interact, and then automating, moving that data or making modifications with that data, calculations, etc. with Microsoft Flow. And then we can extend each one of those through development. And then we connect all of that through common data service with content and connectors and gateways. And so today we're talking about those three things: Power BI, PowerApps, and Microsoft Flow, and concentrating on those connectors and gateways. All right, so for your gateway configuration, we need to identify a gateway server. What the gateway is going to do is interact. It's going to enable that interaction with the cloud tools with your on-prem. So you need to identify what's the best for a gateway server. First of all, you need it to be running all the time, at least if it's in production. So if you are running a gateway server all the time, what best to use in your environment is up to you. So it could be a dedicated server for this case. It could be an existing server that you're using. So maybe that's your database server or the like. The only thing it can't be, and a lot of people ask me, hey, can I put this on my domain controller that's always running, hopefully? Can I install it? No, that you cannot install the data gateway on your domain controller. So pick another server. And really, we also have to talk about resources. It is recommended that you have 8 core CPU, 8 gigs of RAM at least on that server. Windows 2010 Windows Server 2012 are 2 at least. Later is better. And we'll talk about why those resources are needed here in a moment. The next step is to install the data gateway. Once you then install it, then you connect it with Azure to let those services know that data gateway is available and is connected to you. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'll show you how to download and install the data gateway. When you're on the Flow website, you can download the gateway by clicking the downward arrow here and saying Data Gateway. You can also do it on PowerApps site, on the Power BI site. So you can click the downward arrow here, click Data Gateway, and it takes you to the download website. So I'm going to download the gateway. I'm going to click Run because I want to go ahead and run the installer. And gives you a little information about what gateways are doing. So it should be, just like I told you, it says gateway should be installed on a computer that is always on. That's for production, especially for if you're using flows, and if you're just doing testing, that's fine. But if your gateway goes down, then your flows will actually error and you'll get some messages. Okay, so And then if it's on a wireless network, performance is going to be slower. And again, I'll talk to you about what's going on here in a little moment. All right, so we're going to click next. We're going to pick the, because I downloaded it from Power BI, I have the decision to make whether I want personal mode or just I don't choose personal mode. I highly recommend you don't. So we're going to choose the on-premises data gateway, and this is getting everything ready and all the components to prepare for the install. All right, so again, we get our reminders again. This is making sure that our install is on a always on machine. Choose where you want to install it. I'm going to select the C drive here, and then accept the terms of use and privacy statement. Actually read those. I highly recommend you read those. So go ahead and hit pause, and if you're following along, you can go ahead and read those. And I'm going to click install. While that's installing, I want to switch back and let's talk about what is actually going on with the data gateway and how it communicates. So we have our cloud services up here, and again, we're going to be focusing on these three over here for today: Power BI and Flow, and PowerApps along with Flow. And then we have the on-prem data gateway here, and then we have our on-prem data sources, so SQL Server, SharePoint files, etc. So what happens is when I create a Microsoft Flow, for instance, to connect to SQL Server, what is happening is Flow on a schedule, it goes out and says, hey, I need to go check to see if there's been an update to that SQL table. So it creates a query, sends it through the Gateway Cloud Service and Azure Service Bus, and it just queues those queries up. Okay, so you can have many flows running, connecting to your on-prem data sources, and those queries queue up here. Your on-prem data gateway then, on a frequent basis, goes to the Azure Service Bus and says, hey, do you have any queries for me? If it's the right data gateway that corresponds with those queries, then it takes those queries, brings them onto the data gateway, decrypts it, that package, and then says, okay, what is this? It's a query for this SQL table, for instance. Okay, great, I'm going to send it. It then receives the response back, takes that data, encrypts it, sends it back through the Azure Service Bus. Then Microsoft Flow queries and says, have I gotten a response to my query through the Gateway Cloud Service? And when it does, it receives it, takes the content and processes it for it to continue. So point that I mentioned before about the resources needed for your data gateway, for it to be a little bit of a beefy box. Let's not wimp out here on this because you can think about all the communications that's happening with the data gateway. It's also doing a lot of encrypting and decrypting. So it needs that processing power. So we do not want to skimp on that processing power. You will see some lag going on if you don't have enough CPU and RAM. So just monitor those resources and make sure you have enough, okay? And if you're being pegged and it's using 100% or close to it, then you're going to need to increase that. Another question I've been asked before is, can this be a virtual machine? Absolutely, this can be a virtual machine for your data gateway. Again, it could be a shared resource that's performing another, maybe a web server or something, but just keep track of the resources that are being used, the network connectivity. Another point I wanted to make is the location of your data gateway. If you have multiple data centers, maybe spread across the country or around the world, and most of your data is in site A, in the data center A, or maybe even a half of it or a good portion of it, and your data gateway is in another data center. Just to remember what that data gateway is doing. It's having to process the queries from the cloud, send the queries to whatever data it's trying to grab, process, bring it back, and then send it up. So you're increasing that network traffic and latency. Okay, so bring your data gateway closer to the data it's going to access. So having multiple data gateways is a good thing, especially if you have a lot of sources that you're going to connect to, and especially if they're in different locations. Okay. All right, let's put this to work. Let's talk about what we're going to do today. We're going to use SharePoint Online. We are doing, I'm going to have a form, I'll show you that in a second. Microsoft Flow to move data. And then I'll talk about creating connectors and such in Microsoft Flow, and those are shared with PowerApps. And then Power BI, we're going to report on some SQL data, some tables in SQL Server. I mentioned SQL. On premises, we have SQL Server and we have a SharePoint server installed, and we're going to be using it as well. All right. How we're going to use that. So SharePoint Online, we're going to fill out a form, and Microsoft Flow is going to take that data, move it to Microsoft SQL Server. That, remember, that is on-prem. Then we're going to do a SharePoint server, which is on-prem. We're going to use Microsoft Flow, which is, of course, in the cloud, to move data from SharePoint Server on-prem to SQL Server on-prem. And then we're going to do, we're going to take SQL Server, we're going to take some table information that's in a table, use Power BI to create a report on that data, and publish it to Power BI service, and see that content being reflected in Power BI. All right. So let's go back to our server, and the installation was successful. Yay! So we're going to enter the email address that we will use with this gateway. Again, this is the connecting with Azure part, so that we can so it knows that this data gateway exists. I'm going to register a new data gateway. I'm not going to restore. We can restore a gateway. Remember, this gateway is registering with Azure. So if we've registered one before and maybe the server has died, blue screen of death, we can't get it back, you can install the data gateway again on another server, and then do a restore or a takeover an existing gateway that's already been registered. To do that, you will need the recovery key. Okay, so I just selected do a new one here, and I'm going to put in a recovery key. So when you're creating data gateways, please take note of your recovery keys. Put those in your lockbox, so your password lockbox that you have for your company. Okay, so here's the data gateway name. Let's call it MVPDays. My super secret password, PASS. All right. Before I click configure here, one note I wanted to make is we can add this to a gateway cluster. We can create gateway clusters. So if high availability is your thing and it is needed, then you most certainly can do that. All right. Click configure. Once this is finished configuring, I highly suggest one change to the data gateway. I was talking about that communication. Your data is encrypted as it moves back and forth between the cloud and your on-prem. However, it does go over port 80 by default. Some people don't like that. So if you want your transport layer as well as your data layer being encrypted, come to the network tab and turn on HTTPS mode. You will need to restart the data gateway. It'll tell you here that, hey, you'll need to do that. So let's apply and restart the gateway. And then once the data gateway has been restarted, let's use it. Okay. So the first situation I mentioned we were going to do was a SharePoint Online, moving data from there into SQL Server. Okay. So let's go to, that has restarted. Here is the SharePoint Online site. I've got a simple list here for events. Okay. And I want to use that list, this SharePoint Online list, for when I create an item, I want to move that content into a SQL table. Okay, and let's see, that SQL table is here. There's only one event in there, so great, we'll know what's there. Okay, before we create the event to move into SQL, we have to create the flow. All right, so let's go to My Flows, and then I'm going to create a new flow. Oh, actually, I'm going to stop here. You can create a flow, and then while you're creating the flow, create your connectors to that data. But I actually like pre-creating my connectors, so it's easier to select. So let's go to the gear and select connections. And then from here, we can click the new connection button at the top. Select what kind of connection it is. I already have one for SharePoint Online, okay? But I need one for SQL Server, for the on-prem SQL Server. So I'm going to select SQL Server. I'm going to use an on-premises data gateway. So it's going to ask me what gateway here at the bottom of this form. So I need to enter the SQL Server name, and that is that. The database name is events. And then the authentication type, this is my my user account that has permissions to that database. You will need, obviously, permissions to write to that database, okay? And if I can remember my password. And here is where I need to select my data gateway. I already have an existing one there, but I want to select my MVPDays data gateway that I just created. All right, and then I'm going to create that connection. All right. So what it's doing now is it's actually going and trying to connect to that SQL server to make sure I actually have access. So it passed. While I'm here, I'm actually going to create one to SharePoint as well. Okay. I'm going to go through the same thing, and I'm going to click SharePoint. Use the on-premises data gateway, Windows. And again, I'm going to type in my username that I'm going to use to connect. Choosing MVPDays again. That's a data gateway we just created. Click Create. Again, does the same thing. It goes through the data gateway to make sure I have access. Done. All right, now let's go create a new flow. We'll go to My Flows, and the first one I want to create is an item. When an item in SharePoint is created, I want to move that to the SQL server, okay? All right, so first off, in the trigger, I want to make sure I have the right connection. So I want the SharePoint Online one, not the on-prem one. So I'll select that one. And then I want to select the site. It is the product site and the SPO events. My next step, I'm going to type in SQL here to filter my choices because I'm connecting to SQL Server. I want to insert a row. Make sure my connection to SQL Server is the right one. So making sure that I am using the correct data gateway, and I am. You'll notice that I pointed to the database when I created the connection, the connector to this, and so now it's pulling in the tables. This is dynamic. Okay, this is great. So I can select the table I want. Now it gives me all of the columns that are in that table. So event name, I select that to get the dynamic content that I want to pick that is coming from. You'll notice over here all of the SharePoint, or the SharePoint list, the SharePoint columns. So event name, let's go with, I think it's called SPO event name is what I called it to differentiate it from on-prem. Expected attendees, the date, let's skip date, let's do topic. I want to select the topic. And then I'm going to leave the event ID blank. So I have my flow. I can save it now. And then I'm going to, you can rename it. You guys know that, right? You're flow experts. So I'm going to go to the flow screen. It's enabled, and let's go test it. Okay. So we're going to click new here. This is a new event name. We're going to call it MVPDays Watch Party. Expected, we're going to have a bunch of people. We're going to have 500 people come. The event day, let's give them time to process. We'll say it's the 28th of November. And the topic, we can select, this is a SharePoint selection here, choice field. This is all about flow. So we're going to select flow and then click save. All right, so we saved a new item. It's down here in our SharePoint list. And now Microsoft Flow on its timer is going to be checking that SharePoint Online list for any updates. And when it sees one, it will then process it and move it down to SQL Server. So we can, I'm going to take a sneak peek over here and say, hey, has it gotten there yet? Well, oops, sorry about that. Let's go back. And it has indeed gotten there. MVPDays Watch Party. All right. So again, what we just did, we have SharePoint Online. Flow watched that list. When an item was created in SharePoint Online, it moved it down to on-prem in our SQL Server. Okay, that's great, Daniel. Let's do one that's the SharePoint site, or the SharePoint on-prem. So we're going to use on-prem, a cloud tool to Flow to watch on-prem and move it just in on-prem. Okay, so here's my events list. So let's go create a flow based on that. All right. Create a new flow. Same, I'm going to select the same when a new item is created in SharePoint. Remember, we need to check our connection. It is using the data gateway. I have found quite frequently that when selecting this, it does not find the URL for the site. So I have to enter custom value. I enter my SharePoint site, but then it should go out and grab the lists that are available. And it did. Okay. So this is the on-prem SharePoint server list. New step, same thing. I'm going to select SQL. Insert a row into SQL Server. I'm going to make sure that my data connection is correct. Yep, same one. All right. So this is, again, dynamic content, but this is coming from SharePoint Server on-prem. All right, so event name, expected attendees, date, let's do, we'll select the event date there, topic, we'll do topic value there, and then we're done. So I'm going to click save. Simple as that. All right. So I've saved that flow. So it's saving. We'll go to my flows. And of course you're going to want to rename this, right? But let's go to my site. Let's create a new event. Remember, this is on-prem SharePoint. All right. So let's do a lunch and learn. Probably 100 people come. The date, let's call it the 29th. The topic, maybe we do it on OneDrive. Sure, why not? All right, and we're going to click save. Okay, so we've added our first item to this SharePoint list. Now, we do have to, we're dependent upon the timers of Flow going out there and checking. So I'm going to come back to this actually, because I wanted to talk a little bit about Power BI. I have Power BI desktop here running. I've connected it to a database on the SQL Server. I have created to a table And then I've created this simple visual showing this visual showing the sales, the subtotal sales for each year. It's historical data, 10 years ago. When you have this connected, I'm still on-prem, right? My SQL Server is on-prem. Power BI is on my desktop on-prem. I'm going to publish this to Power BI service, not on-prem, right? So when I do that, I have to select where I want to publish this, and let's publish this to marketing, all right? That's my workspace in Power BI, that's where I'm publishing it. So let's go look at what I just did. Power BI, marketing, I have no reports or data sets other than this one I just published, okay? So let's make sure that one's finished. It is finished. So if I go and look at that, sorry for the switching, and I look at this report, same report, right? I just published it. Of course, it's the same report. So if I go to SQL Server and I go to that table, which is this one, and let's say I want to edit. All right. So just to show you, this is again on-prem SQL. Let's just change the dates on here so I can show you what this entails or how it functions. All right. So I've changed that table. I'm going to go back to Power BI. I'm going to go to the data sets. I need to configure how this data set is connecting to the on-prem data. So if you remember what I talked about with Flow, we had to create a connector, tell Flow how it's getting to that data and what data gateway it's going through. We have to do the same thing for our data sets. So we go to settings for this data set. I've already actually configured a gateway for this data set previously. So I'm going to use it. I'm going to click apply. Your data set will not work until you do this. It will not refresh. Okay. So now that we've applied that to this data set, go back to the data set, and I'm going to do a refresh. It's going to go and grab the new data that we've just updated in the SQL table. I'll go back to the report, do a refresh, and then I'm going to see that 2015 year that's been reflected that when I edited the table in SQL Server. And let's go check back to see if our data from our on-prem SharePoint list got added to the table for our events. So I'm going to add this, and voila, it did get added. This is the one we added, the Lunch and Learn for 100 people. So yay, it did get added. So powerful stuff. We're able to really report on all our on-prem data, move our data using Flow. I hope you see the power in that and see how easy it was for us to do that for our users. Again, here's my contact information. Would love to connect with you after the conference as well. Thank you for joining us for MVP Days.